something. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Aquarium. I'm Jerry Schubel, president of the Aquarium. I'd like to welcome all of you who are here in the theater and all of you who are watching remotely. And I want to acknowledge our sponsors, Gazette Newspapers, and also the Downtown Courtyard Marriott Hotel. I request that all of you who are in the theater, please turn your cell phones off or at least put them on vibrate and try to refrain from texting for the next hour. Tonight we're going to talk about everything you ever wanted to know about tsunamis. What they are, what causes them, where they come from, the ones that are most likely to hit California, and how well prepared we are. We have three distinguished panelists with us. Their bios are in the handouts that you have, but I'll mention them in just a minute. You should have this handout prepared by Reggie Harrison in his office that shows the potential tsunami flood area. And you'll notice you're in it. You're probably, though, in a really safe position tonight because I suspect if there's a warning, these three will be the first ones out of the room. And
That's true.
So you're in good shape. So to my immediate left is Reggie Harrison. He is the first director of the newly created Department of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Communications in the city of Long Beach. It was created in November 2014. The department is responsible for disaster preparedness, homeland security coordination, and the city's emergency communication functions, 911. Next to him is Kevin Miller. He's the tsunami program leader for the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. He represents California on the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program, serves as co-chair of the Mitigation and Education Subcommittee. And next to him is Rick Wilson, a senior engineering geologist with the California Geological Survey. And he's worked for over 26 years on the geologic and seismic hazard fields, much of it with the state seismic hazard mapping program. And for the last 10 years, he's been the science coordinator for the state's tsunami preparedness and hazard mitigation program, which is headed by the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. So we've got three outstanding people. And I'm going to ask them each a few questions. And then when we are finished with the discussion among the four of us, we'll open it up to all of you and try to answer your questions. But I think, Rick, we need to start with some basic definitions. What are tsunamis? How do they originate? And what are some of their characteristics? And I know you have some slides, so you're free to stand up. And
Thank you. Yeah, I brought slides, just so happens to answer your questions. So I appreciate you asking those questions that we set up ahead of time. So let's see if this works. There we go. So what is a tsunami? The best way to be able to characterize a tsunami is by comparing it to what we know as a wind wave. Wind wave, basically, it's about a minute long. It comes and it causes a curling wave, a breaking wave on the shoreline, and then it recedes back out to the ocean. A tsunami is much different. A tsunami surge, and it's not really a wave, it's a surge of water that comes on shore, like a river, if you will. And it can last for 10 to 20 minutes coming on shore, and then going offshore another 10 or 20 minutes. And so this goes on for a period of time if you have a very large tsunami. And usually the first wave is not the largest. So people that go down and they put their feet in the water and they say, you see the media, they go down there and they put their feet in the water and say, well, it's the time of arrival and I don't see the tsunami. So back to you in the newsroom. Tsunamis can really, the first 6 hours basically are the primary parts of the tsunami where you can get the largest wave. How do tsunamis form? They can form in multiple ways. The key for forming a tsunami, though, is a displacement of the water surface. That's what you need to cause a tsunami. So the main ways that those are done, about 90 to 95% of tsunamis are caused by faults underneath the seafloor. And so here is a little video that kind of shows that, if I can get you to push it there. You get pressure built up on a fault that's underneath the ocean, and as that pressure builds up, it turns red. No, it doesn't normally turn red, but it releases in an earthquake. And that earthquake allows it to release. The land underneath the water goes up, which then lifts the surface of the water up also at the same time. Mound of water at the surface, gravity takes over, and then you have tsunamis going in all directions. The tsunami wave then goes across the ocean, and if you have a local area, it's coming onshore very quickly. So that's 90 to 95% of the time we get an earthquake that causes a tsunami. The other 5 typically are caused by landslides, and they can occur by coming down into the water as a splash, or they can occur underneath the water surface. And I have, this video shows, go ahead and roll the video. Video shows a submarine landslide that basically fails on the slope there, and it sucks down the water surface above it, so there's a negative wave, and it pushes the water away from it, causing a positive wave. So this positive and negative wave, gravity takes over again, and then that spreads out. Now, landslide tsunamis don't occur very often. Like I said, it's a very small percentage, and when they do occur, they only really impact about 30 miles around that if it's a very large landslide. So they're not something we're as concerned about, but it's still something we have to look at. So some of the tsunami sources we have to deal with in Southern California, and I'll just go through this quickly because I think my colleagues are going to talk a little bit more about this too. But I'd like to break it down into 2 different types of tsunamis. One is a distance source tsunami that comes across the ocean, and you have a period of time before it arrives on our coast. And these particular types of tsunamis can occur along most parts of our coast, around the Pacific Rim, around the Ring of Fire, where you have these plates coming together, these tectonic plates coming together, and you have that displacement, one going down under the other, and then as the earthquake lets go, you get this very large displacement vertically. Now you notice here in where it says California, right there, so in Southern California, we don't have one of these really large, what we call subduction zones. So we don't have the type of fault that creates a really large tsunami here in Southern California. It's basically the faults in this area are all strike slip faults, so they move, they're all related to the San Andreas fault system, so they move laterally instead of vertically, and that doesn't generate a tsunami directly. So when you have a distance source tsunami like this, you can get a period of time to evacuate. It's the 2 that we're really concerned about, 3 actually, Cascadia, where we only have about an hour, hour and a half before it comes to Southern California. Alaska, Aleutian Islands, where we have some of the biggest earthquakes and some of the biggest tsunamis that impact California, and then Chile. For Alaska, Aleutians, it takes about 5 hours to get to Southern California. For Chile, it takes 13 hours. So that's enough time for people to evacuate from waterfront areas if they need to. For local sources, as I said, most of the faults are strike slip. They don't really displace the water column that much. But we do have a potential for landslides offshore, but very small potential. We've mapped a couple landslides offshore, and when we did work on how old they were, we found out they were 7,000 to 10,000 years old. So they don't happen very often here in Southern California, but it's still something we need to prepare for and think about a local event. If you feel the ground shake or you see the water recede, this could be an indication that a tsunami is coming on shore locally, and you need to go to high ground immediately. The last slide, I think Jerry had asked me to kind of describe one of my experiences with tsunamis, and I want to talk about the 2011 tsunami from Japan. We're a couple days away from the 7-year anniversary of that event. That was an event that killed over 18,000 people, caused $360 billion worth of damage. It's the most costly natural disaster in modern history. And they're still feeling the effects of it with the Fukushima nuclear power plant and the radiation leak there. Some parts of Fukushima haven't been reoccupied yet. But one of the locations I went to when I was over there about 5 months after the tsunami was Aniyoshi, community of Aniyoshi and Aniyoshi Bay. And this was the area that had the highest run-up during the tsunami. It got up to 130-foot elevation on land, okay? Now, Aniyoshi had experienced 2 tsunamis in the last 120 years, and after the second tsunami, they decided to put these stones up, And I know it's kind of hard to see, but right here, it's a stone tablet that reads, "Build your community above this stone," okay, for the safety of your family. And this community did that. They are all above that stone, and that stone's at 150-foot elevation. So those past tsunamis got up there too. When you go down into the valley, I had a hard time really thinking, what's a 130-foot elevation tsunami look like? It was pretty much the perfect storm of tsunami. You had a tsunami that came into, which was about 30 feet high, coming into this very narrow shoreline that was kind of focusing into this one valley. It went through the mouth at about 60 to 70 feet. And then when it got on land, the slope was just about right for the tsunami to just go up to 130 feet elevation. And the power this thing had. So what you're seeing here is, this right here is called a trim line of where the tsunami erodes the vegetation off the rock. And that's about 60 to 70 feet high, okay? You can see here, there's two blocks. This was where their seawall was, and this is also a part of the seawall. It pushed the seawall in 1,000 feet, and if you want to see the size of that seawall, you can see here's a person for comparison. This is a cement block, pure cement block, that got pushed 1,000 feet inland. So very devastating tsunami locally. But the good news is we don't have this kind of threat in Southern California. So keep that in mind. The tsunamis we're looking at for maximum size tsunamis are on the order of 10 to 15 feet, but where we are now is below that elevation. So we have to keep that in mind for the areas down that are very low elevation. So with that, I'd like to give it back to Jerry. And
Okay, so Rick,
next person.
Tsunami, I think in Japanese, means large wave in harbor. What got us calling these tidal waves, since they have nothing to do with the tides?
That's a good question. I think just because it was showing a very rapid tide change. So usually a tide will change once or twice in a day. You'll get every 6 hours, I think, a tide. You're the oceanographer, so you probably know this better than I do. But you get a tide coming in over a 6-hour period of time, and you see the water rise and the water fall over a very long time period. Tsunamis are much different. You get water coming in, 20 minutes later it goes down. So it goes up and down over a very short period of time, but it looks like a tidal wave, if you will.
And if I think you said it takes about 6 hours for a tsunami from Japan to get across.
It takes 10 hours from Japan, yeah.
So they're going pretty fast.
Yeah, they're traveling at the speed of a jet plane, basically 400 to 500 miles per hour. And they're very small in the open ocean. They're just a couple, maybe if it's a large tsunami like the Japan tsunami, it was probably about 1 foot high. But as it arrives on our coast, because you have the bathymetry that pushes the tsunami up, it slows it down. You get that, as you slow down the tsunami, you're increasing the height of the tsunami and the power of the tsunami. So it's kind of a trade-off between the two.
All right, thank you. All right, then Kevin, we're going to turn to you. Rick started on California's risks from tsunamis, but this is your bailiwick. How much risk are we at in California? And where are the ones that we should worry most about? That is, where do they originate?
Well, I too anticipated your question with a couple of slides, so thank you. We in California, we don't have, thankfully, the huge risk that they do immediately offshore of Japan. But we have, in the past 6 years, as the slide says, experienced, or the past 9 years, experienced 9 tsunamis, which have activated our response system for emergency response in California, that activated the State Warning Center, and all the 20 counties along the coast of California had to respond in some way to tell their citizens what to do. And really the only thing you can do with regard to a tsunami potentially coming is get out of its way. And you can see from the 6 tsunamis, they're coming from different areas around the Pacific, the South Pacific, from South America. And our worst tsunami to impact California in this time period is clearly this one from Japan. It's 5,000 miles from Japan to California, and yet it caused $50 to $100 million in damage to the coastal infrastructure that can't withstand that rapid tide that normally occurs over a 6-hour period occurring within a 20 to 30-minute period. Just floating docks aren't built to withstand the forces that occur in such a short time frame. And so that's kind of what was experienced in a few places like Santa Cruz and Crescent City up north, but actually 27 harbors up and down California experienced damage from that event. Also from this Chilean event, there were $3 to $4 million in damage from that event. And what we see is, as was mentioned, it takes about 5 hours for an event from Alaska. Each of these rings is 3 hours, so down here is 6 hours, but about 5 hours from one of our worst potential tsunamis would be coming from Alaska. This is where we had a tsunami in 1964 that killed 12 people in California and destroyed 30 blocks of Crescent City, which is kind of a place where we've had a lot of tsunami experience. In Crescent City and Hilo, Hawaii are kind of tsunami magnets, and unfortunately for them, they learn a lot about tsunamis, but they also experience some impacts. As was mentioned, from Japan, it's about 10 hours. From Chile, it would be about 15 hours. Our most recent event is this one. It actually was in January 2018. January 23rd, all of California was put into what is called a watch. We can be put into different categories as defined by our National Tsunami Warning Center, which I'll describe in just a minute here. Let's see. And what we have done is shown locally where in California water could potentially go by mapping 5 different scenarios for each section of coast, kind of our coming from each of those source areas, and combining that into a potentially worst case scenario, saying that within the red area, which is basically really close to the coast, except for some very flat areas in the harbor and down in the Naples area. But if you follow the coast, it really won't go far inland. If you're at the top of the bluff here in this area, that's above 10, 15, 20 feet, which is as high as most of these events can go. Statewide, this also hugs the coast. We generally have high ground nearby, and that is the message. If you feel a local earthquake, that is not as likely to happen, or if you're told to go to evacuate, it's good to familiarize yourself with where you are in this particular area, and where your safe ground is, and practice walking there with your family, yourself, with a group of people. I think there's an event coming up here in Long Beach next Saturday that Reggie may talk about. That is basically getting that muscle memory going out of the zone and knowing how far you've gone. And in Crescent City in Northern California, they did a drill prior to the 2011 event in which they evacuated their whole city as a drill. And then when the event actually happened, they had a phone call, called all their citizens in the middle of the night during that Japan tsunami, and people said that having practiced it 8 months prior, they knew exactly what to do, and they felt much better, and it worked very well in that situation. So we at the state have worked together with the scientists and as scientists and emergency managers to put together these maps just to show where to evacuate from, and then this has served as a basis for planning for emergency response throughout California.
So Kevin, we've got 5-hour warning from Alaska, 10 from Japan, 13 from Chile. In the unlikely event there was a landslide off of our coast, how much warning might we have?
We would not have much warning at all. So in that kind of a situation, what we're talking about is a warning system where we have a few hours, but in a local event, you would feel an earthquake, a strong earthquake, and if you feel 20 seconds or more of shaking at the coast, if you're at an immediate coast, that would serve as your warning. The earthquake, the shaking would serve as your warning that there may be something happening, and it's a good idea to potentially go inland to high ground. You may see tsunami signs in the area that point you, that say if you feel strong shaking, move inland. There may be route signs, and there may be signs that say entering or leaving tsunami zone, and those entering or leaving signs are placed at the edge, the inland edge of the inundation zone, so that's an indication that you have gone far enough. If you don't have the map in front of you, that's what some of these signs are kind of designed to do, is to show you where to go when you're outside.
I wonder how many people here knew about the January 23rd, 2018? Only a few, half a dozen. Reggie, I didn't know about that, and I thought we were friends. I know.
You guys must be night owls.
What's the deal here? You didn't call, Reggie.
You know what? I tried to call you, Jerry, but you didn't answer my call. So one of the things that we do, and I'm going to bring this. You have some more slides? I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
I'll click through a couple. So we prepare in Long Beach for all hazards. Long Beach is a very, very complex city in terms of disaster preparedness, and you can see the fault lines that we have, the faults that crisscross our city, indicates that the most probable disaster for the city of Long Beach is an earthquake. But we're also very much concerned about the gas pipelines, the water utilities that we operate, the airport that we operate. So we have very much concerns about man-made terrorist attacks there. We live on the Pacific Rim, and we manage one of the largest seaports in the world. And so we are extremely concerned about tsunamis as well as terrorist attacks that could occur there. Injuries from a tsunami can be mitigated through preparedness, through timely warnings, and through effective responses. And that really is the takeaways for my portion of this presentation. I'm going to talk more specifically about how you can prepare yourselves and your family and your business for a tsunami. So let's do this first. Let's get in the zone. And this map is here. And some of you might have picked up the brochure that has the map out there, and there's others that we left as well. But let's take a look here. I think Rick already identified that we are within an inundation zone or flood zone right now in the city of, here at the Aquarium. Our flood zones is really separated by the 710 freeway, and you can see it runs east along Ocean and Livingston, and then southwest to the ocean. This is this is Ocean Boulevard here. This is 7th Street, as I recall, here. And so generally, you want to get up to about 7th Street, gets you up about 2 miles away from this inundation zone for the most part. The other recommendation is that you somehow get to 100 feet elevation, and you're going to be hard-pressed to get to 100 feet elevation in Long Beach unless you're going to go up to Signal Hill. We're pretty flat. On the west side of the 710 freeway, it generally runs along Anaheim Street here in south and west to the ocean. So this is PCH here that will get you about 1.5 miles away from the ocean. And so this is sort of a safe area here. Again, the goal is that you be able to get 100 feet elevation, 2 miles away from the ocean. So how do we prepare for a tsunami? First thing is that we get informed and we stay informed. And so Jerry was talking about he didn't get a message from us. Our primary messaging system for the city of Long Beach is Alert Long Beach. We send out alert messages to your mobile device, text, phone, email, directly to where you are, to where you live or work. Messages go out in American Sign Language videos as well. We have a number of redundancies in our notification system. We're about to embark on utilizing a FEMA notification system, that WIA notification system that sends out notices, alerts, similar to Amber Alerts. Anybody ever got an Amber Alert? That loud noise? So the Alert Long Beach requires, as a subscription program, it requires you to sign up. And there's some brochures out there that will walk you through how to sign up for that. But the FEMA system, if you're within range of a cell tower, you will get this notification. That's really important because we're a mega tourist destination, and so we want to be able to get to the tourists as well. We have redundancies built in. We'll use CERT volunteers. Any CERT volunteers in the audience? We got some CERT volunteers. And we're going to talk a lot about CERT as the night goes on. But CERT volunteers, first responders, a lot of other notification systems there that you can sign up for or subscribe to. Get trained, and I mentioned CERT already. That is our primary means of training our residents to be self-sufficient and to be able to provide support for themselves while first responders are en route to your location. Along with CERT, we offer Alarm Beach Search and Rescue training, as well as the American Red Cross, as CPR and other types of training that you can get. For residents in our neighborhood, one of the new initiatives that we're really pushing is a program called Map Your Neighborhood. Map Your Neighborhood offers an opportunity for residents to really understand the resources and the risks that they have within their neighborhoods. An opportunity for you to better understand who lives in your neighborhood, who are the plumbers, who are the electricians, who are the teachers, who are the nurses that can provide assistance in the event of an emergency. Also, understanding the risk in your neighborhood as well. Who are the elderly people? Who are the people that are going to need assistance with evacuation? Who are the young children, these latchkey kids who are home during the day? So Map Your Neighborhood is an excellent program, and we're really pushing through that. The Tsunami Walk that Kevin mentioned, this is our second year, March 17th, next Saturday. We're gonna do this Tsunami Walk adjacent to the Will Rogers High School is where we're gonna start that walk. Every September, we host an event called Ready Long Beach. It's a mega expo, disaster preparedness expo. We have FEMA representatives, we have the military. We have all of those folks that you've seen in pictures where they're providing assistance to residents. We have them all there. We have booth, we have display, and it's really a good opportunity for families to learn about resources. And then, of course, the Great California Shakeout every October. Evacuation plans have been talked about some. Map your evacuation route, predetermined places where you can meet up with your family once you've gotten out of this inundation zone. Plan to go by foot or by wheel, by wheelchair, by bike, by skateboard, not by car, because we're going to be jammed with traffic if everybody jumps into their cars to evacuate. So by wheel, by foot, and practice your plan. Practice your plan during the day. Practice your plan at night. Terrain looks a lot different at night. And practice for both a local earthquake as well as for a distant earthquake. So you distant, obviously, what you just heard from Kevin and Rick is that you have a little more time. But for a local, you have minutes. And so you really want to be prepared for that. And prepare a go kit and have an emergency kit ready. Think about the special needs. Just think about the things that you use on a daily basis. Those are the kinds of things that you need to put in this go kit and be self-sustaining for at least 7 days. So we talked a lot about warnings already, and unlike earthquakes, tsunamis do give us warnings. They give us both natural warnings as well as we have official warnings. And we've talked a lot about earthquakes, far source earthquakes. Those are warnings from nature that a tsunami could arrive. Tsunamis reach the shore. Rick talked about how fast they're moving, and then that speed as they're in the deep ocean water creates a roaring kind of a sound once they reach the shallow beach areas, and that's what you get that. And that is another warning where the water is receding as well and exposing the ocean floors. Those warnings, and especially that retraction of the water, is an important warning that nature is giving us, because that, about 5 minutes after that retraction of water, is going to come that first wave of that tsunami. And I think what I've seen in some of the literature is that phenomenon, that phenomenon that people don't see very often, attracts people to go down to the beach and want to observe that, and that is the wrong thing. Wrong answer. The answer is to go to higher ground, get there, stay there until until you're told that it's all safe. I went through some of these official warnings already previously, so I'm not going to cover those again. I talked some about map your neighborhood, again, the resources that you have, understand where your safe areas are and where your emergency routes are. And then when all else is lost and you didn't start moving out quickly enough, then understand what other resources might be available to you. For instance, a sturdy concrete building, right? You'd want to get up to at least the 3rd floor and start heading up to the roof. And when we're talking earlier, we're looking at the parking structure out here, and that may be an opportunity. But understand what those other last resort kinds of resources are as well. We've talked about inundation and flood zones. If the tsunami is caused by an earthquake, you want to be careful that there may be down power lines and weak structures, bridges, overpass. So you want to be careful about that. And as been told or said already, the first wave may not be the largest and it may not be the most dangerous. So there's going to be recurrences of these waves. Number of ways in which we're able to, well, these are the types of messages and actions that you should take, and some of that was covered as well already. So warning is the highest level of alert. Immediately move to high ground if we're issuing you a tsunami warning. Advisory is there, stay out of the water, move away from beaches and waterways, follow the instructions of local officials, and then there's a watch as well that may give you some additional time. Watch is kind of like stay tuned, be prepared, but stay tuned. Then there's a 4th area of an informational type statement that NOAA might put out as well, and that statement is the one that I like to hear most often, because that one says, relax. Relax. There was an earthquake that occurred, but you're not going to be impacted by it. So we like to hear that. And then again, I'm just showing you here a host of resources and alerting and communications notices and devices that are available to you. We try to be prepared, Jerry. We try to be prepared for all hazards in Long Beach. The tsunami is one that if we put in the effort to be prepared, to have our information systems in place and then execute our plans to move to higher ground, we can really mitigate injury through that, taking the few minutes that's allowed to us to move to safe grounds.
So Reggie, I guess the reason you didn't call me is that I didn't sign up.
You didn't sign up.
How many people here, raise your hand if you've signed up? Larry, I knew you'd signed up. That's so, but we all should. It's free. You can't access my checking account or my credit cards.
Nope.
I guess if it's not an earthquake with a tsunami coming from Chile, Alaska, or Japan, if it's local and we don't have much time, the earthquake itself is the best warning, and the best thing, if you were at the aquarium, then would be to go to the parking garage and get to the top level. Is that right?
The best thing is to start moving up inland as far as you can.
Yeah, but if I've only got seconds, I'm never going to make it to 7th Street.
Right. Well, you got your tennis shoes. You can start jogging up there. Pick up a bike in your...
So let's see. One issue that always comes up is, won't the Long Beach breakwater save us?
So take that one.
I guess I can try that one. It won't save the communities, but it could help dissipate some of the energy from the tsunami. But if it were a large enough tsunami, the tsunami will end up going over or around. It'll find a way to keep coming. And like I said, these could be 100 miles long of surge coming over. So yes and no is the answer.
So it might dissipate a little energy, but certainly it's not going to stop any
it's
significant.
not going to stop.
No. Anybody? So
Yeah.
well, let's raise the house lights and let's see what questions we have from the audience. The Fukushima, the earthquake and the tsunami killed thousands of people. It wasn't the meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear reactor. We had done a study here in collaboration with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution because they wanted to get the message out that if you look, there was concern that from the radiation that crossed the ocean or in seafood that spawned off of Fukushima and then maybe came across the ocean, we ate it, whether we would be at risk. And the scientists at Woods Hole showed quite conclusively that if you were a surfer and went surfing for 2 hours every day, you would get some radioactivity. Or if you ate seafood that came across from Japan and ate seafood every day, you would get some radioactivity. But in both cases, the amount of radioactivity that you would get would be less than going to the dentist and getting a full set of x-rays, and would be less than the radioactivity you get by flying cross-country from LAX to JFK. So, all right, who has the first question from the audience? And we have a microphone. Larry, go ahead. We're going to get you a microphone, Larry. We want everybody to hear this brilliant question.
No pressure.
As a boater, how far offshore in Long Beach area do I need to go before I hit that 1 foot tall bump? As
So
opposed
instead
to,
of going inland, he wants to go offshore.
Yeah.
How far off does he have to go?
Well, we've done quite a bit because of work, because we know that the maritime community is the most impacted and the first impacted by one of these events. And there was a rule of thumb that existed, but not a lot of scientific studies. So working with the University of Southern California Tsunami Research Center and California Geological Survey, we're looking at 180 feet of depth, yeah. And so that's going to vary based on the undershore or undersea topography. But we also wanted to put out information along with that, that one size does not fit all in terms of boaters. If you are an experienced boater, the fishing fleet in Humboldt Bay evacuated, and Crescent City evacuated in advance of the March 11, 2011 tsunami, because they had practiced and they knew that they could get to this depth. But if it's a stormy sea, that's something to consider. Also, it was mentioned that these are long duration events. The Japan tsunami had dangerous currents going on for 50 hours, 2 days. And so you need to have enough fuel to stay out for 2 days. The home port that you came from could be destroyed, so you have to think about where you would potentially go back to, and that port might also be destroyed because it's affecting the whole coast. So think about if you're prepared to go out, if you're prepared to stay out for a long period of time, and what your plan would be, and that you have enough fuel, food, and water. And if it's iffy, then protect your life over your boat was our recommendation.
much better answer than I was expecting.
But 180 feet off here wouldn't be terribly far, unlike the East Coast where you know, 100 miles to get to that. So anyway, we have another one over there.
I was thinking in fathoms, which is different.
Did you say fathoms?
No, it's feet.
Feet, yeah. That would change if it were fathoms. We'd be in a
It's
different.
30 fathoms.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have 2 brief questions. If there's a catastrophic event of like a submarine with a nuclear head missile and they shoot it off underground towards us, could that cause a landslide? And there we could potentially have a catastrophic tsunami. The other thing is my concern with people with disabilities dependent on elevators. How much notice? Will they shut off the electricity? Because if you need to get out the building in an elevator and say, for instance, I live on the 4th floor on Magnolia and Ocean, is it safer for me to stay in my apartment? Or is it safe for me to try to get out? Because I certainly wouldn't want to be trapped in the elevator and flooded out. Thank you.
Magnolia and Ocean, I would stay put, but what would you recommend if you're on the 4th floor?
Yeah, if you're not in the mapped zone, then the safest thing
Well,
is
that's probably still in the zone, but on the 4th floor,
Fourth.
and with a disability in a wheelchair.
it would make sense.
And what about,
There would be no plans to shut off the electricity
but
unless
it might get shut off.
But it might get shut off, and so heeding that warning as early as possible to take advantage of your evacuation route would be the thing that would be most advisable. You know, when we had the power outage in the downtown area a couple of years ago, we had a number of residents that were trapped in high rises. The elevators weren't working. There was no electricity. And we relied on search and rescue to go up and provide assistance. And if time permitting, we would utilize those same resources.
So the other question, if one of our new enemies in response to the tariffs decided to launch an underwater missile, might it set off a landslide that would cause a bad problem for those of us in California?
I think I remember reading a book or seeing a movie about this, but yeah, it was actually it was a book. It was written by Michael Crichton, where they actually set off some nuclear devices underwater to cause a large landslide, which triggered a tsunami. It could happen, but I would think that if they were looking to, I mean, I'm not an expert when it comes to nuclear warfare, but you know, I think that would be the more worrisome thing, is the nuclear part of it. But yes, it could be possible that some man-made thing could generate a landslide that could cause problems. But it would take an awful lot of work to get that.
And depending upon where that explosion took place, you might have quite a bit of warning. Describe in a little bit more detail this network of dart buoys.
The dart buoy system is in the open ocean. There used to be 6 of them prior to the Indian Ocean event. Then they increased it to 39 in the Pacific. And then adding in the Indian Ocean and other systems, they've built it out. So I think there are about 60 buoys worldwide, including in the Atlantic, that can detect up to a centimeter of differential in pressure and send that information to by satellite up to the National Tsunami Warning Center, so that the way the system kind of works is that a large earthquake is detected, and they will notify about that earthquake right away. It can take hours, even going at 400 to 600 miles an hour, to reach the first detection buoy. So they'll put out the warning within a couple of minutes, 1, 2, 3 minutes, about a large earthquake, and then there's potential. Once they get some confirmation from the first dart buoy, then they will put us into one of those, confirm one of those categories, or increase us or reduce us from one of those categories that were in a warning watch or an advisory. And those updates are coming every hour to emergency managers and the public at the same time. And so we're all responding in our own capacity. If we're planning mass evacuations, that's information that's feeding into that, but the public and the media have that information at the same time as well.
Do I have to be signed up to Reggie's number to get that?
No, that's public information. It'll be in the media. It'll be on tsunami.gov is a website that anyone can go to and see live information.
Add one more thing to the landslide sources. On the one map I showed, one of my slides, I showed 2 sources offshore, and those were 2 that we actually modeled. Those are the ones that happened 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, but we wanted to see what would happen from that. And it turns out that it doesn't do a lot here in Long Beach, maybe about 5 to 7 feet high. So even if they did trigger, if something got triggered by a landslide, it would still really just, you know, the waterfront areas would be the problematic thing, not you know, a massive kind of land or a tsunami that you might expect or you might think about.
So of all the natural disasters that we might be exposed to, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, hot spells, in terms of the risk to human health, in California at least, tsunamis would be well down that list.
In certain parts of the state, I think in Southern California it could be low on a list. It's just that it's not a very common event, so
No,
that's the tricky thing.
Right.
For our north coast, we have one of these subduction zones offshore, north of Cape Mendocino, Cascadia subduction zone. And so it is a very large problem, a big problem for them. It's higher on their list.
Right.
Not only from the earthquake, but the tsunami that could follow that could cause a tsunami up to 30 to 50 feet high. So they're very concerned about that.
Have we ever had one in historical record that high?
Not in the historical record, semi-historical, because it happened, the last one that happened, they actually know the date, January 26, 1700. Not because of anything on this shoreline, but because it was recorded in Japan. as a tsunami that they call it their orphan tsunami. It's basically didn't have an earthquake that triggered it, so it was an orphan tsunami, and in 1700, and so that was the last time Cascadia ruptured. We've looked at the geologic record, and we know that in the last 10,000 years, there's been 19 ruptures of that particular fault. So we have a good history on that, and it's not that we're overdue. It's kind of that we're in the window when it can happen again.
Who has the next question? Okay, go ahead.
I apologize, I was late getting here, but the main reason I came was because I wanted to know if we have an earthquake here, does it create, I heard you say it will create a tsunami too. So my husband assures me that if it was an earthquake, we wouldn't get a tsunami if it happened locally. So I want to know if he's just trying to
Yeah,
make not nervous.
The bad thing is that we're within the San Andreas fault system in this particular area. All the faults are there's some large faults capable of the magnitude 7 earthquakes that have the ability to move laterally. What you need for a tsunami is a fault that moves vertically, and we don't have those types of faults locally. We have a couple, but they're pretty small, and they have very long return periods. They don't happen very often, ruptures on those. So most of the time, the fault by itself won't cause the tsunami here. What we're worried about is that it could trigger a landslide or something that creates a small tsunami where we want to evacuate because we felt the earthquake. So it's kind of a natural warning sign for that. But chances are unlikely it'll cause a tsunami, but there is that chance.
Can I ask you a personal question? We are on the Inglewood-Newport fault line. Is that any greater or lesser of a chance of having a major earthquake than other fault lines that are around here? Because we're like right on it, and so it's kind of like, do we stay or do we go?
From a tsunami perspective, you're safe, probably for that. But no, it definitely is a fault that's active. It last ruptured in 1933. So we know that it's capable of creating pretty large earthquakes. It is a hazard. It's one of the many hazards when we have these faults crisscrossing Southern California. So it's just one of those things we have to deal with,
It's not any more or any less than any of the other faults around Long Beach?
The fact that it did rupture in 1933 probably reduces the stress on it, so that's a positive, but it has about the same as any other fault in this area.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, we have one over here with Ed, and then we'll go back and then back up to you, Larry.
Thank you. I'm pleased that you're putting on this program. A couple of questions, if you don't mind. First of all, I want to talk about currents. I'm a member of a CERT group in Alamitos Bay, and we've been drilling for earthquake, et cetera, for over 20 years. But after the 14 seminar we had, the question of currents for days, really, that can stop a ship in its tracks or stop a big boat in its track and rip piers, docks off of piers and pilings. It occurred to me that there will be, just like here at the aquarium, there'll be lots of tourists. In the Alamitos Bay, there'll be lots of kayakers, lots of swimmers, lots of canoers, sailors. And we have to figure out something to do to lead them. And Mr. Harrison, I hope that the Long Beach authorities are prepared to help us out with that as well. Number two is, main thing is, a lot of the Bay Area cities have tsunami evacuation signs. And I just wondered, is the city of Long Beach, and this is a great brochure that you put out with the routes, will the city of Long Beach come up with signage like Huntington Beach and the South Bay cities as well? Are there any plans for that?
To this point, neighborhoods have not determined that they want tsunami evacuation route signs for various reasons that we've left that up to the neighborhoods to make a determination about that. We have seen them in Huntington Beach and other coastal cities. They could be effective, but I think that the most effective thing to do is for individual families to route their own evacuation out of those areas. Now that leaves tourists that might be in the areas, and how do you account for them? And so the redundancies in our system calls for, I think you put your hand up, you said you were a CERT volunteer. And first responders, we would rely on them, our first responders in foot and in the air, to provide those kinds of notices and direction to move away from the beach areas. We've for various reasons, neighborhoods have decided whether or not they want evacuation route signs, and we certainly have them available if they like them.
Should that be a neighborhood decision? Nobody's listening, Rich. You can tell me. Okay, I know you represent the city, but it seems to me if a neighborhood's at risk, if they don't want to maybe alert people, probably depress the value of real estate, but isn't that a city responsibility?
I think ultimately disaster preparedness is an individual and it's a personal responsibility to be prepared. Route signs could be effective. Whether they would be effective at night or not, if you see it, maybe it's more effective during the day. So they're not a panacea to have the route signs there, but for new people into a neighborhood, that could be. Now, Long Beach and in our coastal areas, it's fairly obvious the way up the hill in most cases. But within some of those areas that are closest, you do have the marina areas, and you've got to be able to maneuver across some bridges to get there. I'm not sure if you're going to show route signs in those areas.
Do most of the cities in California that are along the coast, do they have tsunami evacuation signs on the roads?
We have about 10,000 signs up and down the coast of California. So there's some in each county, not every single community, and it's a process because they can there's a perception that they could depress real estate value, which we have not seen demonstrated. When we work with at the state to have worked with a number of communities to develop some implementation plans. So we're not going to put a sign, we're not going to recommend putting a sign in front of anyone's house. It would be between two houses, that kind of thing. So that, like, this house, Tsunami, no. And there are 5 different kinds of signs that could be put at a park that says, if you feel strong staking, go to high ground. That's kind of a public information message. Route signs are a different type of message. Whether you're entering a zone is a different type of message, that kind of thing.
And given that almost everybody now has a cell phone, is there any excuse for us not to sign up for your program, Reggie?
You know what, there really is no reason not to sign up. The information is all held confidentially. We don't share it with any carriers or anyone else. We use it for the intended purpose, which is to issue alert notices of a variety of types. Well, last night we had a law enforcement issue, and for that area that was affected, we used Alert Long Beach to send out that message. One of the questions that I get asked quite often is, why don't we use the warning sirens that Long Beach has historically used and other parts of the country as well? And in some cases, I think residents have told me that they still exist in some neighborhoods, these sirens. You recall earlier in my presentation, I talked about the complexities of Long Beach. We have multiple disasters that we need to be prepared for, and we need to be able to communicate specifically to residents what is the issue, what protective actions they should take, and what is law enforcement doing. And sirens don't answer any of those questions except to say something has happened, but it doesn't tell you whether you should shelter, you should evacuate. Yeah. And so those are the things that are important in this. That information is what saves lives. So there is absolutely no reason to not sign up for Alert Long Beach, and it's fairly easy. And certainly we have some staff available at our office that we can help you with if you have difficulties.
We had another question over in the middle, I think. Well, the people who are watching remotely won't be able to.
Yeah, my question was related also to the evacuation signs in areas. I live down in the Naples area, so that was one of the concerns, being that we are on that water area. If they were ever thinking of putting signs up in the area to show, you know, how to get out and stuff like that. I mean, I will just say this: I live near, right off the water. That water appears to be rising all the time. There are times that the tide is so high up that you can't even walk around the canal. So that's not a tsunami. That's just tides raising from the earth and what's happening in our world. So there's just a concern overall, I think, that, you know, especially when you live in those areas, you know, where to go and stuff like that. There's a lot of people who've lived there for years, and I don't know if they actually would know how to get out of the area. So.
And sea level is rising. It's going to continue to rise for a long, long time. It will be at least 3 feet higher by the end of the century, and probably twice that, and maybe even more. And so coastal flooding will become a greater and greater risk. Is this, you're in Susie Price's district, right? Yes. You should talk to Susie about getting signs.
And come out to Tsunami Walk-in Resource Fair on the 17th.
Unfortunately, I won't be here, but I would do it if I was here.
Okay. Another question, somebody? Go ahead.
Hi. For earthquakes, we have seismic retrofitting. For tsunamis, is there anything that you can do to prepare your house? Or is it? Or is there anything you can do outside the building, let's say? Anything you can be doing besides just going to higher ground to help protect your structure?
It's a tricky thing. I think for, you know, wood frame houses and, you know, 2 stories and less, really there is nothing we can do completely to prepare for them unless we have a tsunami and you have valuables that you move to the 2nd floor of the attic quickly. That kind of thing could help.
What about if you open the front door and the back door?
Well, it sounds like it's a joke, but that is one of the mitigation measures for tsunamis, is to be able to build a structure, don't have the living structure at the water level, have it higher, and have a throughway underneath. And there's some new building code going in, although it's for primarily essential facilities and critical facilities, but down the road here, I can see that at some point we may have some ideas and some plans, mitigation measures for buildings that are residential. It's a tough thing, though, because we don't want to put people in a house that we know is going to fail and have them maybe try to evacuate to the 2nd floor when that's a bad thing to do. So it's you know, we have to weigh those 2 different sides.
We had another one down here.
Can a house be reviewed by an engineer to see how it would handle a tsunami so people would know what to do? Is that a good idea? And can that be done?
Primarily, I think the earthquake risk is probably the highest thing here. So if you can get an engineer to come out or an architect, engineer to come out and look at it for the earthquake thing, that would be a main thing. If they did want to look at tsunami stuff, I think primarily, like I said, anything that could be a flow through at the lower level, like more windows, you know, a garage that opens on both sides, things like that. But then you kind of you weigh it against the seismic problem, because anything open at the lower floor creates less stability in the structure for an earthquake. So it's a tough dilemma, but I think engineers are starting to look at that more now.
But it's going to be a while before the building code catches up with this issue,
True.
I think.
Wait, say that again, I missed that.
It's going to be a while before the building code catches up with this issue. I mean, we're just getting there with earthquake, and it's been studied a lot longer. But it's a great question, because that's the direction we're trying to go in right now.
Okay, we have one down here. Oh, okay.
Reggie, the map that you have showing the area that we need to get to, is that available on the cell phones where we sign up? because we may not necessarily be at our home where we say this is the way we're going. We could be someplace else and the family or friends are scattered. So is that available on the phones, and then we can know to guide us as to where to go if we're not at the location that we practice trying to be safe?
Right, so you're asking if the map is available on the phone. It's not currently available on the phone. It is on our website, that if that's a possibility. The alert notice that we would send out would direct you to move to higher ground from wherever your location is. That's the message. That would be the message. There are apps I should mention as well, if we haven't already, that you can subscribe to that will give you information on earthquakes and where they have occurred and what magnitude those earthquakes are. And you can set the parameters for the areas that you want to receive these alerts and notices, as well as to what magnitude. So take a look at that. USGS, I think, is one of those that has an app, and there are others as well.
Yeah, there's you can type your address into My Hazards. You can type in My Hazards as in a search, tsunami or earthquake, and that'll take you to a website that you could potentially bring up on your phone. It'll be small on the phone, but it's where you can type in your address and see if you're in a zone or not.
Over here.
You had mentioned in your presentation that you needed to be prepared for 7 days, self-sustainable. What do you find that people don't take as much as they should have, that they forget?
Water is one of the big things. You need about 1 gallon of water per day per person. That sounds like a lot, and it is. But it's one of those things that we absolutely have to have.
Yeah.
Somehow I also think that residents need to work with their physician as well for the different types of medication that you take. That is it possible to have some on reserve? I know sometimes that's difficult. I get calls from the pharmacy, and I'll go to get my prescription refilled, and they say I should have some already, so they're not going to refill my prescription. But the medicines are going to be very, very important. You're going to be away from home. You're going to be in an evacuation shelter, and we're going to do our best to provide things, but there are certain things that we're just not going to have access to.
We'll take one more.
My question specifically is a Long Beach and maybe San Pedro question. In Wilmington, what about the secondary effects of a tsunami hitting shipping? And what's going to happen there?
Yeah, our shipping...
Even small ones,
But there's enough warning that probably most of the ships would either leave the port, go out to sea, or if they're at sea, they would stay there.
If you've got that kind of warning, then you're also concerned about the infrastructure as well.
Well, the infrastructure, yes.
So you're concerned about that. And, you know, our port, I mentioned how robust that is. It's about $1 billion a day when that port is down. And it has, you know, there are grave ramifications across the country when that port is not in operation. So one of the things that we're going to look to do is to return to normalcy as quickly as possible. We'll prioritize the critical facilities. We are limited in terms of the amount of first responders that are available, and so that, again, is why it's so important that people be self-sustaining. One of the other things, if I just may, and this will be my last thing on the tsunami, that does make it more challenging is the damage that it does do to our infrastructure. So roads get wiped away, so we can't even get ambulances in, and fire trucks and other vehicles. Even if they were available, the roadways have been destroyed. And in some cases, that happens with an earthquake as well, but even more pronounced with tsunamis. And so it's a lot to prepare for.
Tsunamis fall into the category of what are called black swan events. Low probability, but high impact. And the ports are doing a really good job to plan for higher sea level and coastal flooding. But if you had a big tsunami, a modest tsunami, it would certainly help because they're elevating most of their platforms 3 to 4 feet. But with a big tsunami, So I'm going to give each of you the opportunity for a 1-minute closing statement. We'll start down there with you, Rick, and work our way this way.
Sure. Well, thanks. And I appreciate everybody showing up and hearing to us babble on about tsunamis. But I hope you learned something, and you know, we're always here to answer more questions. Contact information at the state. You could probably get that through the city here, or maybe the aquarium. We are working on other things, as kind of Kevin alluded to. We're working towards mitigation side and the recovery side. One of the things we're working on is some new products that for the harbors that show debris movement. And so, you know, after a large tsunami, where that debris is going to end up. And that's really important for getting the harbor back into working order afterwards. So that's one of the things, many things that we're working on. And the last thing I'd like to say is that you know, we all live, this is really the wonderful state to live in, you know, and Long Beach and the area here is a great place to live. Tsunamis is low on the concern level, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared. So that being here is a big first step.
Great.
Kevin?
Yeah, that's a good point. We have a good program here in California working with all of our coastal cities and counties that's based in science, that takes into account how to respond to one of these events, and we want to provide the best information out of all of that to the public, to everyone, so that our goal is for the public to understand what to do when one of these events happens. So hopefully we've conveyed that. Just to follow up with that, with regard to the last question about the port, there was a detailed study done with the state in cooperation with the USGS called the Science Application for Risk Reduction, led by Lucy Jones down here in Southern California, that came out. And I think there was a panel here at the aquarium about that at the time, and that has some specific information to the impacts to the port. And that is the kind of information that we're looking at, as well as now that we know what the problem is, what are the impacts going to be? And this is the kind of thing we're going to continue to study so that we can plan for how to address it in the future. It's a big undertaking. We have a big state. We have 40 million people, but it's something that we want to tackle going forward.
Reggie?
I'd just like to, again, just thank you all for coming out as well and your interest in tsunamis. And when you prepare for a tsunami, as we recommend that you do, the good news is that it also prepares you for a lot of other hazards as well, including earthquakes. So that's the good news. You can get 2 for 1 when you do your preparation. The other thing is this region, I believe, is as prepared as any for the kinds of disasters that we're talking about. Between the county, the city of Los Angeles, the city of Long Beach, and surrounding cities, we share a lot of resources. We receive Homeland Security grant funds that provides for training, that provides for equipment that we need, and we think that we're prepared much better than we have been in the past. We know that there's still things that we need to continue to do, but the cooperation between the entities that needs to provide the resources is there, and I think that that's perhaps different than in some other regions.
So, Rick, Kevin, Reggie, I thank all of you, and I thank all of you. And Reggie, the next time you call me, I promise I'll answer, but I'm hoping I don't get a call from you for a long, long time. Thank you, everyone.